Ah, the Dutch Golden Age. A time when tulips were priceless, paintings were masterpieces, and apparently so were the scandals behind closed canal doors. Forget Rembrandt's brushstrokes. The real artistry was happening in Amsterdam's bedrooms, and let's just say the neighbors heard everything. But before we wade through this swamp of shamelessness, smash that subscribe button like a gilder in a tavern brawl, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And at what scandalous hour? Midnight candlelight? Morning coffee sin? Or somewhere deliciously in between? The Dutch Golden Age is remembered as a time of trade, empire, and art, but trust me, it was also the golden age of unbuttoning. Amsterdam wasn't just the financial hub of Europe, it was also its gossip capital, where scandal moved faster than spices from the East Indies. If money could buy you a fleet of ships, it could just as easily buy you a fleet of lovers. Let's start with the most infamous hotspot, the bathhouses. Officially, these were places for cleanliness. Unofficially, they were Netflix without the subscription fee. Merchants fresh from voyages would spend fortunes not only on silk and sugar, but also on warm company in the steamy chambers. Pamphlets of the time mock these establishments, calling them schools of sin, where students majored in anatomy and minored in regret. Then there was the brothel industry, which thrived under a strange Dutch contradiction, officially frowned upon, but unofficially tolerated so long as taxes were paid. And believe me, they paid. Brothels were advertised with paintings of mythological goddesses, and if you didn't understand the symbolism, don't worry, the madam would explain with a wink. Satirical engravings from the period show respectable burghers sneaking into these houses with the same energy we use to sneak into fast food chains at midnight. But the real scandals? They unfolded in private homes. The merchant class, flush with wealth, often hosted parties where wine flowed like water and inhibitions evaporated faster than brandy. Letters and court records describe evenings where wives swapped partners, husbands pretended not to notice, and everyone pretended it was for the sake of culture. If you've ever thought swinging was a modern invention, the Dutch were already running clubs before clubs even existed. Artists didn't just capture landscapes, they captured bedroom antics in their sketches. Some of these were passed around like memes, cheap prints mocking clergy, wealthy women, or ambitious young men caught in compromising positions. Moralists would cry foul, but the prints sold out faster than tulip bulbs. And let's not forget the sailors. For every portrait of a stoic captain, there are records of sailors returning from months at sea who wasted no time in spending their pay on what the city offered. Amsterdam's red light district has roots in this very era, with its infamous lanterns glowing like an invitation. To some, it was shameless. To others, it was simply Tuesday night. All of this created a society where hypocrisy was the true national pastime. The same preacher who condemned debauchery from the pulpit might be spotted slipping into a brothel 2 streets away. And of course, pamphleteers made sure no such slip went unnoticed. Think of it as 17th century Twitter, full of shade, scandal, and people pretending to be outraged while secretly loving the drama. So yes, the Dutch Golden Age wasn't just about tulips and trade, it was also about trousers dropping faster than stock prices in a bubble. And trust me, this was just the opening chapter of their shameless saga. If part 1 was all about the public shamelessness of Amsterdam, part 2 takes us straight into the homes, courts, and pulpits of Dutch society, where everyone claimed to be virtuous while doing the exact opposite. Let's begin with marriage, the most respectable institution, at least on paper. Dutch marriages of the era were less about love and more about accounting. Picture a business merger, but with lace veils. Contracts were drawn, dowries exchanged, and alliances secured. But when passion ran out, and it often did, so did loyalty. The divorce rate was surprisingly high considering the church frowned on it. If a woman could prove her husband was off gallivanting with courtesans instead of handling the cheese business, she might just win her freedom. Letters from court records tell us of cases where wives documented their husbands' absences like private detectives, gone for 3 nights, likely with the red-haired wench near the docks. Honestly, Netflix could make a true crime series just out of this paperwork. The extension of the hypocrisy extended to the clergy. Ministers were expected to embody piety, but reality laughed in their powdered faces. Sermons against sin were often delivered by men who had spent the night indulging in the very acts they condemned. In one infamous scandal, a preacher was caught sneaking into a brothel disguised as a merchant, beard, cloak, and all. The pamphlets that followed were merciless, depicting him clutching a Bible in one hand and a courtesan's garter in the other. It was Dutch satire at its finest. Honestly, the 1600s equivalent of a viral meme. And then there were the artistic circles. Artists often relied on wealthy patrons for their livelihood. But what did those patrons demand besides landscapes and portraits? Sometimes something more risque. Hidden in sketchbooks and underlayers of paintings, scholars have found erotic doodles, tiny rebellions of ink and chalk that mocked the very moralists who funded them. One diary mentions an artist commissioned to paint Venus rising from the sea. When the patron's wife inspected the draft, she noted with dry sarcasm that Venus seemed suspiciously modeled after the maid. Ouch. The merchant elite were no less scandalous. Wealth gave them power, but it also gave them appetites. One notorious scandal involved a merchant who kept not one, not two, but 4 mistresses, each in separate canal houses, all furnished at his expense. When the secret came out, the city buzzed like bees around a honeycomb. Satirical ballads were sung in taverns, mocking him for running an empire of love affairs instead of trade. Imagine if Jeff Bezos had a Tinder problem. It was that level of gossip. Meanwhile, sailors and dock workers often found themselves entangled in more desperate arrangements. Brothel keepers extended credit, knowing the men would spend their next wage as soon as it arrived. But some sailors opted for marriages of convenience, short-term unions that lasted only until the ship sailed again. Neighbors joked about women collecting husbands like tulip bulbs, here today, gone with the season. The courts, of course, played their role in documenting the chaos. Trial transcripts reveal shocking testimonies, neighbors spying through windows, lovers caught in barns, or drunken sailors bragging loudly about their conquests. And the punishments? Often fines, occasionally public shaming, but rarely jail. After all, if everyone was guilty, who could truly judge? The Dutch prided themselves on tolerance, but this was tolerance with a wink. It's no wonder foreign visitors wrote with wide-eyed amazement. English travelers in particular left diaries marveling at how openly Dutch society embraced pleasure while pretending otherwise. One Englishman complained that Amsterdam was a Babylon of lust, and yet he somehow stayed for 3 months. Curious, isn't it? By the late 1600s, the contradictions reached their peak. Amsterdam was a city that built churches on every corner while keeping brothels just around the bend. It celebrated Calvinist discipline in the morning and lost itself in libertine indulgence by night. The hypocrisy was so blatant that even the most pious had to laugh. And laugh they did, in pamphlets, ballads, and crude caricatures that ensured scandal lived forever in print. So yes, in the Dutch Golden Age, the only thing stricter than marriage contracts was the creativity people showed in breaking them. And trust me, we've barely scratched the surface of their shameless genius. Amsterdam in the Golden Age, where hypocrisy was sold wholesale right alongside tulips and herring. If the Dutch mastered commerce, they certainly didn't neglect the commerce of bodies. Let's begin with the infamous public bathhouses, those steamy social hubs where moralists claimed one went for hygiene, but eyewitness accounts suggest the water was dirtier leaving than arriving. Picture a room filled with respectable matrons, apprentices, and sailors, all simmering together like a human stew. And if you're thinking, wait, was this co-ed? Absolutely. The Calvinist preachers railed against them, calling them gateways to Satan's sauna. But attendance numbers didn't seem to dip. In fact, pamphlets circulated in Harlem cheekily advertised them as baths for the body, refreshment for the soul. Subtle, right? Then there were the widow houses. Not orphanages, but clever covers for upper-class widows who ran unofficial dating clubs under the guise of charitable work. Imagine Jane Austen meets Tinder, but with lace collars and wine imported from Bordeaux.
Wealthy merchants' sons donated to these establishments only to be rewarded with late-night musical evenings that ended with far more than madrigals.
Gossipers claimed some of these widows made more profit than the Dutch East India Company's spice ships. And honestly, who's to argue? And of course, the canal-side brothels, a tourist attraction long before museums got involved. Foreign visitors often wrote home with wide-eyed descriptions of streets glowing with red lanterns, comparing them to rivers of desire flowing beside the Amstel. One English traveler griped that the women negotiated harder than any ship captain, which frankly sounds like good business practice. The Dutch weren't ashamed either. Paintings often showed courtesans in elaborate gowns, their clients smirking in half-open doorways. It wasn't so much hidden as it was integrated into the city's rhythm. Naturally, all this produced a parade of satirical pamphlets and woodcuts. Artists delighted in depicting stern Calvinists sneaking into brothels at night, only to deliver fiery sermons by morning. Caricatures showed ministers clutching both Bibles and corsets, a two-for-one hypocrisy sale. Ordinary townsfolk bought these prints like hotcakes, pinning them in taverns as wall decor, essentially the 17th century version of a meme wall. But here's the twist. While men often strutted freely, women wielded a surprising degree of sexual power. The Dutch legal system allowed women to inherit property, sue unfaithful husbands, and even run businesses, brothels included. This terrified moralists who sputtered about the downfall of civilization, while pamphleteers winked knowingly, writing, "The women steer both ships and souls." It was empowerment disguised as scandal, and the patriarchy did not know how to cope. So the Golden Age was never just about Rembrandt and tulips. It was a balancing act of commerce, sex, and satire. Amsterdam managed to turn every moral outrage into either a business venture or a joke, sometimes both at once. You could say the Dutch perfected the art of laughing all the way to the bank, and sometimes the brothel. Next time you admire a serene Dutch landscape painting, remember, behind those windmills and canals, someone was probably writing a bawdy pamphlet about what went on after curfew. If the Golden Age gave us tulips, Rembrandt, and naval dominance, it also gave us a very Dutch talent, turning hypocrisy into an art form. Imagine Amsterdam's canals, so picturesque, so serene, and then remember, half the city's moral guardians were sneaking into those same canal-side houses for a midnight tumble. That's not urban planning, that's urban plotting. By the mid-1600s, Dutch households had mastered the secret double life. By day, spotless Calvinist order, with gleaming pewter plates and sober sermons. By night, masked banquets where the wine poured like the Zuiderzee, and the moral compass was conveniently mislaid. One contemporary diarist even joked, "We live as Rome's saints and sin as Rome's Caesars." Subtle, right? Let's not forget the invention of the Keats, the Dutch carriage, perfect for rolling across cobblestones while enjoying more than just the scenery. Gossip claimed some courtesans charged by the mile, not the minute. It makes Uber look wholesome. And then came the infamous milkmaids, immortalized in Dutch art. Painters like Vermeer loved to show them pouring milk, all domestic innocence. But satirical pamphlets whispered that real milkmaids were pouring something far less wholesome behind barn doors. That's not symbolism, that's marketing. Meanwhile, guild culture brought its own kinks. Tailors' guilds had feasts where apprentices were blindfolded, spun, and told to find the thread. Let's just say the thread wasn't always made of wool. And the brewers, they drank enough ale to turn any moral sermon into a karaoke night of bawdy ballads. Merchants, oh, the merchants were the true ringleaders. They financed artists, poets, and yes, entire houses of pleasure. Imagine a modern startup accelerator, but instead of apps and AI, they were investing in silk bed sheets and courtesan contracts. Call it capitalism with benefits.
And because nothing says piety like paranoia, the church tried to regulate everything, from brothel taxes to what fabrics could be worn in bed. Spoiler, people wore whatever they pleased, especially imported silks from Asia. One preacher lamented, "Our women are wrapped in the devil's cloth," which sounds less like a sermon and more like a rave review. The satirical pamphlets had a field day. One broadsheet depicted a minister lecturing about virtue while juggling oranges with one hand and holding a courtesan's garter with the other. The caption, "A holy balance." The Dutch loved irony so much they practically invented sarcasm as a national export. By the end of the century, hypocrisy was so normalized that even city magistrates turned a blind eye so long as the taxes kept flowing. Sex, scandal, and commerce, the real trinity of the Golden Age. So the next time you admire a Vermeer painting or a Rembrandt etching, just remember, behind those serene brushstrokes may lie the messiest double lives Europe had ever seen. And honestly, that might be the most Dutch thing of all. The Dutch were masters of two things, commerce and contradictions. By day, they built the world's most disciplined trading empire. By night, they were importing more scandal than spices. Amsterdam's canals were lined with warehouses of nutmeg and pepper, but step a little closer and you'd find entire streets buzzing with brothels, each boasting exotic courtesans like they were the newest luxury imports. Imagine it, a merchant returns from the East Indies after months at sea. His first stop, not the warehouse, not the wife, straight to the Ross Bert, Amsterdam's infamous red light district, where neon signs weren't needed, the candlelight glowed just fine. And if his wife complained, well, she was already draped in silks bought from the profits from the very same sin trade. Irony, thy name was Holland.
But this wasn't just about indulgence, it was business. Sex in the Golden Age wasn't a hidden vice, it was an industry. Magistrates taxed brothels so efficiently you'd think they were running them themselves. In fact, sermons railing against lust were often followed by tax hikes on pleasure houses, turning every sin into civic revenue. A win-win, really, except, of course, for morality. And morality was where the real comedy unfolded. The same Calvinist preachers who thundered from pulpits about sin were frequently exposed in pamphlets, caught red-handed or red-trousered in the very brothels they condemned. The people loved it. Satirical prints spread like wildfire, showing ministers with their robes around their ankles, juggling both scripture and scandal. It was 1600s meme culture at its finest. The hypocrisy dripped thicker than Dutch syrup waffles. Housewives wore imported silks while preaching chastity to their daughters. Guildmasters scolded apprentices by day, then blindfolded them for tavern games by night. Even the proud milkmaid, immortalized in paintings, became a cheeky symbol of lust. One print showed her pouring milk not into a jug, but over a waiting merchant sprawled in hay. Vermeer would not have approved. What makes it so deliciously ironic is how efficient the Dutch were about it. Where Italy had chaos and France had flamboyance, the Netherlands had spreadsheets. Every brothel had records, every courtesan's rate could be cross-referenced with guild wages, and if you couldn't afford silk-draped intimacy, there was always a more budget-friendly option down the canal. Think of it as the Golden Age version of tiered subscription plans. Netflix? Please. They had Brothel Basic, Brothel Plus, and Courtesan Premium. And the public? They didn't just whisper about these scandals, they celebrated them. Pamphlets were printed by the thousands, mocking magistrates, laughing at merchants, and reminding everyone that the richest trade in Amsterdam wasn't tulips, it was secrets. If Tinder had existed, half of Amsterdam would have swiped right on hypocrisy, and the other half would have printed a pamphlet about it. So while Dutch ships conquered oceans, their people were conquering bedrooms and keeping the receipts.
Coming up next, we'll look at how scandal wasn't just tolerated in the Dutch Golden Age, it was practically legislated.